It's been nearly 3 years since the release of what many would consider to be Frank Ocean's magnum opus, Blonde. 4 years in the making after his breakout debut album, Channel Orange, Frank Ocean returned with perhaps one of the most genre-bending and beloved albums of the decade. For me, this album has only gotten better with age. Blonde came out when I was a senior in high school, in what was a very rough period of my life. And the album holds a special place in my heart, as I'm sure it does a lot of people, for helping me to get through this period. Blonde is an album that serves up what seems to be a very wide emotional spectrum, which is one of the reasons I think this album helps to define our generation so much. As of the last decade, or even just the last 5 years, we've seen a generation that has become largely progressive about dealing with and accepting our emotions. That it's okay to be in touch with yourself and express who you are freely. If there's any album in which the artist is in touch with their emotions, it's Blonde. The album is not just about being in touch with your emotions, but rather personifying these feelings through music. This entire project is an exhibition of Frank's emotional palette. On tracks like Ivy and Pink and White, Frank invokes feelings of nostalgia as he sings about past relationships and their inevitable decline, while giving us truly descriptive visuals of kids in his neighborhood after Hurricane Katrina jumping into the floodwaters, perhaps a metaphor for the aforementioned relationship, a making the best out of a bad situation, if you will. Before Solo, Frank's mother appears in a skit via voicemail telling him not to use drugs, to fit in, and to just be himself. An issue that a lot of us generation seems to struggle heavily with, as we constantly see themes of self-esteem, depression, and drug abuse issues referenced in today's music. In the song Solo, Frank ironically advocates for the feeling he receives when he gets high, which allows him to escape everyday problems. Again, this track deals with a former relationship, a constant theme throughout the album, but instead of dwelling on what went wrong, Frank is in fact singing about the advantages of not having a partner. It's moments like this on the album where we see the stark contrast of emotions across Blonde. While Frank explores the silver linings of not having someone on the second verse, in Solo he expresses the polar opposite of self-confidence on the track Siegfried, where Frank seems to feel lost and alone in the world, and in his own words, he's not brave. Throughout the entire album, we witness, or rather hear, Frank's exploration of a crumbled relationship and coping with it. On Self-Control, the lost innocence of a love interest is exemplified by the cutting of hair, or rather blonde hair. After Self-Control, the album goes in the direction of the after effects of this relationship that has clearly left a scarred heart. The remainder of the album focuses more on self-reflection and, at times, fond reminiscence of the relationship. Like on Wait Ferrari, where Frank reached the realization that overall they'd had a good time, but all good things must come to an end. And White Ferrari may be a metaphor for how rare and precious a relationship like this can be by likening it to a car. Godspeed segues into saying goodbye. Not finality, but wishing someone the best, because even if things don't work out, that's what you do when you love someone. You hope they find their freedom, but if they don't, like Frank says, they'll have this place to call home. But Godspeed's a two-way street, kind of open to interpretation. It might be the former, or it might be more self-reflection by Frank, perhaps a note to his younger self, just as Futura Free is essentially a thank you note and a look back on his own life, saying he should be the one paying his fans. And it comes across that Frank is pretty astounded and grateful to be able to express himself musically for his career, as well as his sobriety, or the end of it. Frank seems unafraid to explore himself on this album in an effort maybe to coerce others to do the same. Not just musicians, but everyone. The ability to reflect on relationships and be able to admit your own mistakes as he does. And that it's good to be self-confident and expressive, because if you can identify who you are and what you love, you'll always have somewhere to go. And having somewhere to go, somewhere you feel you belong, is something most of us struggle to identify, including myself. Not only does Frank reach inside for this material, but musically speaking, he keeps most of it pretty accessible, despite pushing the boundaries of what might be considered alternative R&B, almost cloaking Blonde as an art pop album, but somehow being able to come across as hip-hop adjacent as well. The fusion of musical influences and samples on Blonde is something to behold. Such a wide array as Frank tries to let us into a world that has been mostly shrouded in mystery, especially since Frank hasn't had a social media presence since 2012, and He just recently unprivated his Instagram account. But Frank clearly pulls from tons of artists, from gospel singers to Radiohead and even to southern rap. The true beauty of this album isn't in its simplistic but triumphant production or Frank's beautifully sung esoteric lyrics. The true beauty is the effect it has on its listener and how it finds ways to create a personal connection. Being a straight white guy, I can't relate to Frank generally. We're almost polar opposites, but somehow this album finds a way to break down those barriers, and it's become my personal favorite album of all time. And if I'm being honest, Blonde only gets better when you're going through it. It's rare to be able to actually relate and understand something, no matter who you are or where you're from. But Blonde is that rarity. Blonde is raw emotion, something that everyone can connect to. This album is one of the defining moments musically of a generation that seems kind of lost in itself. A generation where a lot of us seem to struggle figuring out exactly who we are. And when we look back 10 years, 20 years from now, I think we'll only appreciate this album even more and what it had to offer. This has been Blonde, Defining a Generation, a video essay written by me. Connor is my name, by the way, and I'm not really too good at off-the-cuff speaking, but if you guys enjoyed the video, please leave a like, subscribe, comment, share, anything to get the word out there. I really would like to grow this channel where I'll be discussing some of my favorite albums, and I'm a music nerd, and I would love to be a part of the music community on YouTube. I think it's going to be really fun. Thanks for watching.